Hello, this video is to show you an overview of the workflow editor and some of the options that are available. Now that we've created our development workspace, we can have a look at the workflow editor. We can open the development workspace to start with our first workflow by clicking on the workspace name link. If your development space is not running as mine is here, you will need to start it clicking on the Start Stop button. So it takes a few seconds to load your development space. But you can see that my development space is loading. You can see, again, similar to previous BTP enablement content with the Business Application Studio, in my Explorer, you can see that my first project is loaded here. You can see, based on the template I chose, that there are some folders that are already created for me. And you can see the normal start from template, clone from Git, import, files, and folders. So in the Explorer, if we expand the first workflow that you see here on the left, you can see again some folders that are created, such as forms, sample data, scripts, web content, workflows, etc. These particular folders at this point in time are empty because we haven't done anything in regards to the workflow yet, with the exception of if I expand the workflows folder, you can see the my first workflow that we had created when we built or created the dev space. So if we click on my first workflow, you can see that it loads a blank workflow, and this is where we would start. So if we look at the editor here, a couple things. We're looking at a graphical representation of our workflow that we can build. You can see we have a start event, an end event. We have some options up here at the top to undo things as we do them. We can redo them, we can delete them. And then depending on the workflow, we can either show it vertically in this palette, or we can show it horizontally, depending on how large it is. So right now it's shown, of course, vertically. We can see on the right-hand side that we have what we call workflow properties. So there's properties for the overall workflow. And then depending on the nodes, when I choose them, such as a start event, it's possible that we'll get different properties. So again, the name of it, and then any details that may go along with it versus the end event that you can see here, where we don't have any specific details, just the properties themselves. So another method of looking at this is, as opposed to the graphical interface that you see here, if we right click and we choose open with, you can see that this is an option for the code editor. And by clicking on that, you just see a different representation, the code, of the workflow as it stands at this point in time. So again, you can see the start, you can see the start node as an example here. Here you can see the end event, you can see the name of the workflow, the ID, the subject, and so forth. What we're going to do is we're just going to work with the workflow editor, the graphical editor. So when I click on the start event, you can see that I get these gray buttons, and these are called speed buttons. What we have is the sequence flow. We have what are called events, of course, tasks, gateways, and then the option to delete. So if we click on, as an example, the events, what we can see here is we have an intermediate message event option, which is an option that waits for an incoming message before the flow commences. We can see an intermediate timer, which is where we can pause and resume the workflow for a specific interval of time. The end event, that will indicate a workflow's ending point where workflow instance is completed after all parallel branches are executed. And then the terminate end event, where we can terminate an instant immediately on the execution of an event without waiting for other branches to continue. If I were to go to the tasks as an example, on the tasks icon, you can see that we have user tasks, and user tasks are just like they sound, where the user defines input parameters and properties that would go with that type of task. Service tasks allow us to establish outbound connectivity to external systems and services, such as REST or O database services, such as using the SAP API Hub or other APIs, and the cloud platform integration, as well as invoking business rules within our workflow. Then we have our script tasks, which allow us to modify the workflow context at any point within the execution of the workflow. So in a nutshell, it allows us to define code to modify data and implement lightweight business logic. Mail task, just like it sounds. Again, this is a task that will allow us to send an email based on a hard-coded email address, or we could get the context of a object where an email resides and utilize that email as part of our workflow. And then the option to reference subflows. Then we have, in this case, what we call exclusive and parallel gateways. Now, in this case, an exclusive gateway creates alternative paths within the workflow, kind of like asking a question in a workflow and then determining different alternative answers to it. And then we have the parallel gateway. And the parallel gateway allows multiple activities to occur at the exact same time. So over on the left-hand side, if I hover over, you can see I have select, I have marquee, again, I have this sequence flow, which again is similar to my speed buttons, excuse me. And then I have my events again. So just a different way of accessing the different events that I have, the different tasks that we have, and of course, the gateways that we have. So an example, quickly, putting a task, if I were to take a mail task and click on that, you can see that I have the task icon underneath my cursor, and I can insert that, into my workflow. And you can see I have a mail task. Being that the mail task is highlighted, you can see that it's a mail task based on the icon. And we will look over at the properties for the mail task. You can see just simply the ID, the name, and if I wanted to put documentation, and then I can choose details. So a couple different things that we could do. We could hard code an email address in here. We could use, $, curly bracket, context dot as an example, and then the name of a field within an object that might contain that email. In this case, we're just going to use an email hard code it. So en BTP test as an example 001@gmail.com. And then we could put in a CC, we could put in a blind CC, and then of course a subject. So this is a test of our workflow. And this is the actual subject that would show up in the email or in the email sent to the address that I hard coded, right? So that will be the actual subject. Then I have configure mail body. So in this case, I have plain text or HTML. So the default is plain text. HTML, I can click on create a file here. And as opposed to just a flat generic text email using plain text, what that will allow me to do is I can use HTML and put buttons and change colors of backgrounds and what have you. In this case, it's just plain text. So again, this is a test of my first workflow. And this is the body. So again, if you think of the email that we would get, it would be going to this address. The subject will contain this information, and then in the body, we would see this information here. So now that we have a very simple property here, the next thing that we would do is we would want to build this and deploy it. So if we right-click on the MTA YAML file, we would choose to build our MTA project. And you can see it opens a terminal window down here where it gives us some information about that. And then the next step to deploy it would be to expand the MTA archives. And specifically, you can see my first project in the mtar file. So we would right-click and we would choose to deploy this MTA archive. Now, the first thing it's going to ask for, if you have not already logged in, so you could open a terminal window and you could do CF login in this case and give it information, or if you haven't, it will ask you that information. So it's asking you for your BTP server in this case, and you can see that I have my BTP server here already. I'm going to click enter, and then it will ask me for the login information. So this is when I would have created the account and my password. And hit enter. Oops, and you can see my authentication failed for some reason. So let's try that again. Archive. You can see I have this. So we'll do hit enter, and then my password. and hit enter. And you can see now that I've been, tells me down on the right that I have been logged in. It's asking me where I want this deployed. This is my trial server. It's asking me for the space. So my space is generated is my development space. And you can see that it's going ahead and now it's starting to deploy this, the initial deployment to my server. And then you can see again down at the bottom as this may take some seconds that it went through. You can see it was processing. It finished the processing and the updating, and then it tells me that the process is finished. So that is a very quick example of using the workflow editor, building and deploying a workflow. Thank you.